Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I really am privileged to be here. This is my passion. You're here because it's your passion. I am an engineer by education and by training. I kind of made a metamorphosis from civil engineering to environmental engineering, and I hope I don't make anybody mad by saying this, but at the forefront in the 1950s and 1960s, two universities in the United States and several in Europe really jumped on a curriculum of environmental engineering, which is mostly science and about half engineering, a lot of chemical engineering, a lot of science. And those two universities, I was one of the first people, just by luck, to get out of the University of Texas, and also Cal Berkeley. And Cal Berkeley and Texas at that time were almost like Siamese twins because they exchanged professors. The professors would all get drunk together. So would the graduate students. So I feel like I've got a little Cal Berkeley in me, although my accent does not reflect that. If we can go first, let me just go through the contents, and I've got 25 minutes, so I'll try to cover most of it. I don't know, do we have a Q&A, any time for Q&A at the end of the session?
That's the idea, at least 5 minutes.
Okay, great, 5 minutes. Drilling, completion, staging. I will say that I've been in the oil and gas business most of my professional life, but downstream in chemical companies, petroleum refineries, pulp and paper mills, and I would tell you that I think that's more complex than upstream because you have turnarounds in refineries, you have change of feedstock, you have all kinds of cycles in the pulp and paper industry. So we had to adopt our end-of-pipe treatment to reflect those changes, always changing, mostly biochemical, but some physical. Upstream to me is simpler, but the bad news is, or the other news on upstream, it's highly economically driven. And the refineries pretty well know what the price of crude is and what they can get for their feedstock and what they can get for their products. So that, that gross profit is pretty well fixed. Not true on oil and gas. And I'll kind of reflect that as I go through the presentation. We'll talk about the renewables, flow back, produced. Well, you don't produce oil and gas from fracturing without producing things you don't want, like produced water, which is mostly salt water. So it all comes out one pipe. You've got to separate it. You've got to separate the LNG from the oil. So there's all kinds of complex separations at the wellhead. Economics, debt, and investing. I've learned a lot about engineering economics because that's the key that drives our production. Conveyance, I'm talking about pipelines, trucks. Regulatory, there's heavy regulatory oversight. Most of the oil and gas production and permits, if not all, except Alaska and the United States, are at the state level. The states have high regulatory authority on getting a permit to drill and to dispose of produced water. Not true in Alaska, public lands. Actually, Texas had a lot of public lands, but it's under state control. Global, I want to talk about, you have to think global in this business. I spend a lot of time in Europe and Asia, in other endeavors, and energy right now is a global issue. It's on the papers virtually every day. Just for a quick definition, fossil fuels, natural gas, petroleum, crude, coal, and I put nuclear in there because it's an origin from the earth and non-renewable. Alternative fuels, ethanol, biodiesel, solar, wind turbines, geothermal, and others, just for definition. The world is currently in an energy transformation. This is a global issue. This is a global conference, so I think it's appropriate. Fossil fuel extraction is resulting in an exponential increase of oil and gas, not just in the United States, but it's starting to happen in other countries. And I'll go through that kind of area by area before I leave. Water is our most precious resource. I've heard generals in the Army say that our next wars will not be on oil, but water. And I've heard a lot of people say that. So water is a very valuable resource, and water is highly in demand for fracturing, hydraulic fracturing. Makes me nervous. Major producers, recent. United States now has surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia in production of fossil fuel energy. It happened about a year ago. It's expanding. And that's because we've had 2 million hydraulic fractures in the United States to this point, 2 million. And my boss on a publicly owned company used to be a wildcatter. You don't drill dry holes anymore. You don't do that anymore. The hydrogeology, the science, all of the technology below the ground, when you go down, you're going to hit oil and gas. That's a given. The question then is it commercial? You don't want to drill down and spend $10 million per frac and not make a profit. So if you know what the yield will be, and we're talking about barrels per day typically, you know what your payback is, you know what your investment is, and typically you want to get paid back on your investment in 3 years. That's also downstream companies use about the same economics. These are the hot spots in the United States and Canada. Right now, two of the hottest spots are these two right here, the Eagle Ford and the Wolfberry formations. That's for the company which I serve on the board. I go out to the rigs, I watch them, I get involved. When you're on a publicly owned board, there's things you cannot do, like sell stock and buy stock, if you've heard of Sarbanes-Oxley. So I'm very restricted. I really can't do any business ties with my company except to sit over there and, with my colleagues as an outside board member and pontificate. But we have really smart people. These companies, we're a relatively small company on the New York Stock Exchange, about a $2 billion market cap. In the world of independent producers, that's pretty small. You can see there's a lot of play right now in North Dakota, Williford, and it extends on up into Canada. This is the oil production growth. USA has jumped far ahead now of Venezuela, Saudi Arabia. And Roberto over here and I were talking last night about Pemex. I work for Pemex, a Mexican national oil company, which is going into the private sector, correct me if I'm wrong. And right now, hydraulic fracturing is beginning to occur in Mexico. They've got a lot of proven reserves. So you'll see Mexico kind of track the United States and Canada as we go forward in hydraulic fracturing. This is the impact of all plays by year. Texas hydraulic fracturing is not new. It was invented by 1949. A gentleman by the name of George Mitchell, a physics major at A&M, unlocked the key. So the technology has been there for a long time, but now it's U.S. technology. It's high tech, it's high risk, and it works. North Dakota, a little state of North Dakota now booming because they found a tremendous amount of oil and gas. They don't have the infrastructure to support it. They've got trucks. They don't have good rail. So, but they're producing a lot of oil now. And this is a Wall Street Journal article on this. I won't spend the time right now to go through it. It gets into global. Both EU and Germany are significantly cutting back on green subsidies. I've spent a lot of time in Germany. Wind is very much in disfavor because the German population is paying about twice as much in the households we pay in the United States. So they're looking at alternative and they're looking at fracturing. Having said that, I don't think Germany and England, maybe UK, Germany and Poland and EU countries, of which are 28, my impression after being over there, they don't want to fracture themselves. It's a different environment. It's more hostile to any kind of oil production, unlike West Texas, Utah, Wyoming. But they want the United States, they want Western gas. And I think those two are going to marry up. And I think in our professional lifetime, you're going to see that happen in the next 2 or 3 years. That's kind of the genesis of what I'm talking about. This is very complicated. I learned a lot of this as a chemical engineer. But when you drill down, right now, you have several casing. You drill down and you stage it. Now this is really clever. You never used to stage. In a formation, and when you talk to the geologists, there's hot spots and cold spots in that formation. You drill horizontal now. Most wells are horizontal. On this particular well, this is our well. We go down, it's in central Texas, in the Eagle Ford. We go out 2 miles. And we want to perforate where the hot stuff is. Perforate so we can get the oil and gas. So what they do, they make a lateral turn, plug it, perforate, plug, going downstream up to the top. That means you're perforating where the hot spots are. That's high technology. And this particular well has 18 stages. In other words, 18 stages where the perforations are very carefully placed to extract the hot spots. We call them pay spots. Now, GDP is consumption, investments, government spending, and exports minus imports. Let's go back to the United States. When I was a young engineer, we were importing 70% of our oil and gas, mainly from Saudi Arabia. Today, we're importing 30%. It's against federal law right now to export crude and natural gas because of OPEC, it was an OPEC-driven thing back in the 70s. We're on the verge now of changing the law, federal law, that we can't export LNG. You can't export natural gas except liquefied, LNG and crude. I think that will happen in 2 or 3 years, and right now in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and the coast of Texas, we're building LNG plants to get our gas over there. And I would say that it probably goes to Europe before it does to Asia. When the U.S. becomes energy independent, which I think will be in 3 or 4 years, you see the price of oil has gone down. That's the marketplace because we're producing so much. We were at $100 crude 6 months ago. Now we're at $80 crude. But GDP, we're the biggest exporter of food in the world, but when we export energy, fossil energy, that will really help our GDP, which is kind of dormant right now. Many of the European community, including the Ukraine, Poland, Germany, contiguous countries, are planning on gas as a primary supplier of energy in the future. Germany is shutting down their nuclear plants. Germany, long term, to bring their price down, is going to get away from primarily wind and going to go to natural gas. It's clean, it's got a low CO2 footprint, so that's kind of the future. I spent a lot of time in Poland. It's really interesting. I've made 4 trips there over the years. We've had strong ties between the University of Texas and Poland and Stanford University. Anybody from Stanford here? Well, Stanford has an ongoing energy policy and consortium with Poland. And Stanford is highly involved in many of these endeavors. This is from a fellow, Dr. Gromyec, who I've known for a long time. He presented this to our faculty at UT just a few days ago on the energy sources in Poland. That's where their hot spots are. That's actually in Europe. You see, England has some, northern Germany, and quite a bit in Poland. I gave lectures over at 2 universities over there, and by the way, the professors and students speak better English than I do. So we had an easy communication. I told them, I'm not over here to promote fracking. That's your call. I'm here to let the marketplace work so you can take your choice of fracture on proven reserves yourself or import it from the West. So that's kind of where they stand right now. These are his comments. I got to speak with a lot of energy people in Poland just 3 or 4 weeks ago. Virtually all their gas now comes through the Ukraine from Russia. And also Germany gets a lot of Russian gas through the bottom of the Baltic Sea. So the marketplace is going to work. There's obviously politics involved here. Engineers don't get into that. We just look at marketplace. But my estimate is that virtually all the EU, 28 countries, will be on natural gas and so-called clean energy in the future as they work this out. It might be Russian, it might be American. That will be a marketplace deal. But we'll say they're building a deep water port in Szczecin, western Poland, as we speak. It'll be ready in 2 years. So they can take now big tankers of LNG and oil and pipeline it all the way to the Ukraine. That's been done. I've talked to their engineers over there, and that can be done in the next 3 or 4 years. So if we match that up with Western energy and the ability to deliver it FOB Warsaw, then you'll see a dynamic change in particularly the EU. These again, he was talking about the Crimea conflict. As you know, there is a vote going on right now in the Ukraine. And I spent a lot of time with Ukrainians in Poland. Their first language is Polish and their second language is Russian, but you can kind of tell their first language in Russian is over in eastern Ukraine, first language in Polish is over in western Ukraine. So kind of like the North and the South United States, there's always kind of a language problem there. Argentina, this is interesting. They have vast amounts of natural gas in the Pampas area. I asked their engineers over there where they get their energy, virtually all from Indonesia, but now they're starting to hydraulic frack, just as we speak. So Mexico and some of your neighbors to the south are looking at this. Give them a second look at this, and you'll probably be of the Latin American countries the first to really implement that. This is a bad slide. Every time our CEO and our CFO see this, they just go in tears. Why is that? It's flaring. And you can sell that. And when I drive from the Texas Gulf Coast to my home in Austin now, at night it just looks like daytime because they're flaring all this gas. I went to one of their engineers and I said, why are you flaring all this gas? He said, because there's so much gas down there, it's a safety issue. We've got to flare it for safety. But hopefully that will all be captured because that's a real waste of energy. And kind of an air pollution problem, but that can be solved. I retained a nuclear physicist at A&M who has laboratories all over the world because I get involved in disputes from time to time on the origin of methane. Methane is, you've seen a lot of lawsuits on methane messing up water wells, particularly in the United States, going through a lot of court law. He is working now on speciating methane because there's 4 or 5 sources of methane, biogenic, teratogenic, so forth, and speciating it with radioisotopes to get the origin of methane. And that's really interesting. This is an old German scientist, so I've kind of developed a partnership with him without any exchange of funds, except I'd support his graduate students if we ever pay him, on his postdocs, as we go through that process. These are the federal subsidies. Now, as you know, green energy in the United States is heavily subsidized. And I've talked to some of the characters who were on Obama's Energy Committee in the early days, one from Stanford, one from A&M, and they all said, at some point, it's got to make it in the marketplace. You've got to transfer from subsidized to the marketplace. And I think we're in the transition of doing that. This is the money paid back in taxes by the oil and gas industry here compared to health care, utilities, retail. And I'm around people who are adamantly against this process. And that's fine. We talk. But if you're going to talk to me on that, you better do your homework. I don't want any stuff that's not really science. I want science to prevail, just the way I am, and I think most of you. But right now, the university systems and the state of Texas are getting billions of new dollars now from the oil and gas production in the state. Here's my concern about fracturing. It's water. This is a Texas water plan. We're basically from West Texas, or all of West Texas to Central is basically low rainfall, but very rich soil, kind of like the Ukraine. Ukraine and West Texas have some of the richest soil in the world. So my dad, 3 generations were dry land farmers. They'd make 1 crop out of 5 and then make it through the other 4. So irrigation is by far the largest use of water in Texas. Municipals next, and these are projecting out to the year 2020, steam electric, and you see fracturing and livestock just barely show up. The problem is fracturing draws people. People drink water. So there's kind of a counterproduction there when towns grow exponentially, like Austin, San Antonio, growing exponentially, limited water. So now we're starting to look for brackish water and reusing produced water, not fresh water, to frack. The technology is that we know how to do that. We can take seawater, worse than seawater, and turn it into fresh water. If you've been on a cruise ship, you know that. It's just cost. We know how to make old water new. These are the gallons of water used per million BTU of energy produced and power generation per megawatt hour. I won't go through that. It speaks for itself. But some of the, if I'm against any of the greens, I'll be very frank, and tell you what it is. It's ethanol. And we raise corn on our farm, so I've got a conflict. Ethanol takes thousands of gallons of irrigated corn to make 1 gallon of ethanol. And I think you'll eventually see ethanol go back from the 10% to maybe 0 in the next few years. And I would say water's a key issue here. Brackish water, now we're looking at that again. I'm talking about TDS. Seawater is what, 40, 50,000. I'm talking about water in the 10,000 range. Drinkable water is 1,000 or less, just to give you a scale to that. But we have a lot of brackish water, you can take it 5 to 10,000 parts per million of dissolved solids. It's not too costly to bring it in to fresh. These are just, I won't have time to go through all these. These are great quotes. W.C. Fields, I never drank water because of all the horrible things that fish do to it. Mark Twain said, whiskey is for drinking, water is what you fight over. But a more serious thing was by, of all people, Mikhail Gorbachev, how water, when you look at the Volga River and all the rivers, they draw people. When you're out of the water source, the people have to migrate. So I won't go through all of his quote there, but it's exactly right on target. Pipelines, you've heard about the Keystone Pipeline. It's been going on longer than World War II did. In my opinion, it'll never happen. It's a political, it's not an economic, it's a political decision. But right now, east-west pipelines are being built all over the United States. So as we go longer, the Keystone is going to become more and more irrelevant. Now, here's the difference in cost per wet ton mile. It's quite pronounced. 20 to 30 to 50 times more to go by rail, and then trucks is the worst of all. It tears up roads and all, so pipelines are being built everywhere, not just in the United States, but all over the place. In fact, I think the deal that Russia cut with China will be about a 3,000 or 4,000 mile pipeline from Siberia down to China. This is, I want to end up with this. This came out of our board meeting. I knew about this, but Wall Street knows about it now, and this is kind of interesting. Engineers can really understand this. This is our total debt. You have to have debt to be in the oil and gas business. Bank debt is short-term and it floats. We're paying right now 3.5% for bank debt. It floats. It can change overnight. We issue a lot of bonds. The reason we're public is we have to have access to public debt. Bonds, notes. And so these are senior notes. And you see how that ratio changes all over the place. That's because our financial people and the people who make the big decisions right now for our company are financial people. That's how they work. And I asked them just, how come this ratio changes from time to time? And that is they're going to have a new drilling program. They've got to have quick debt. They go to the bank. They charge a low percent interest. But the bank can call their note in 10 days, and you can't operate that way. So how they balance that is really interesting. And the last slide was I just got last week. How do we stay in business when the price of oil goes to $70? We're going to make money at $80, and I say we, the same size companies for which I serve on the board, we can make money at $80 today because we're in very rich fields. We've got 50,000 acres of prime lease. That's a big deal. Now, by the way, the bank notes are based on production. And the long-term notes, treasuries, not treasuries, but the long-term notes are based on acreage. So they're totally independent on how much money they're going to loan you. So we ran various scenarios. This is our base. This is the Eagle Ford. These are two big plays that we have, both about 10,000 feet. And we look at 1 rig, 2 rigs, 3 rigs, and these rigs are very, very expensive. And if we have a little bit more production, we take that extra production, look at the price of oil, and make a decision whether we keep 2 rigs idle and one rig working. And this is not rocket science. It's just basic economics, but you have to have a technical understanding before you can make these decisions, and that's why it's so exciting. That completes my comments, and I've got, a few minutes of Q&A.
So, thank you, Dr. Ford. Have you answered the pattern?
right. Okay. So I have a couple of questions. Whether I'll put them now or over morning, it doesn't really matter. Do people have questions to ask of Dr. Ford? Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment, I know we've discussed this, on the value between gas and liquids. Should we take all our gas and make liquids?
Yeah, this is the way to do it. I'll just stay down here. The question is, do we make more gas than liquids? We stay in oil right now. When we have a well, we have about 80% oil, which we know what we're going to get, which is about 5 times more expensive per BTU than gas. So it's more profitable. But the future, if you believe Boone Pickens, and I do, that in the future all of our automobiles will be on natural gas, I think that's going to happen. But natural gas is clean. So we're going to stay with oil right now because we get more money for it. I think that marketplace is going to change. I think it's going to be shifting toward natural gas. We take our natural gas and have a pipeline, and we send it to a major pipeline, and it goes right into the refinery and other energy-demanding businesses. So we have our own pipeline, which is a feeder line, and that's all for gas. That's all for gas. Or we take it out in trucks, and we have a little bit of rail. So it's kind of 2 balls up in the air.
But that wasn't my question. My question really was, shouldn't we work on technology to convert gas into liquids?
Gas into liquid. Well, sure. Absolutely. Natural gas has so many ways you can handle it without liquefying it. Let me tell you, I work for Formosa Plastics, one of the largest companies in the world out of Taipei. They use natural gas as a feedstock for liquids, for HDPE, for vinyl chloride. They're making tons of profit right now because natural gas is cheap. So natural gas is a great feedstock. It's a great commodity for whatever use it is.
I will add a comment of my own before we proceed. Well, before Dr. Ford is presented with his keynote certificates. In discussing natural gas vis-à-vis liquid fuels, of course, the condensate from the gas is hugely important. The condensate, the gas condensate.
Oh, the copper.
Yes. And I thought that might have featured in the dialogue just then. Yes.
Yeah, we get 2 or 3 forms of natural gas.
Yeah.
Condensate, some MGL, straight MGL.
Yes.
So we separate all that out at the site.
Right, okay. Well, thank you again to Dr. Ford.